I'm Greg Whitus with the Alabama Cooperative Extension System, and I'm an extension aquaculturist. And this is Dr. John Jensen, a retired extension fisheries specialist, and we're going to demonstrate today how to hand fillet tilapia. In this video, we're going to demonstrate some techniques for getting the best kind of dress out when you hand fillet tilapia. John, one of the reasons we felt that this video was needed is I'm fielding a lot of calls right now on aquaponics systems. And in these aquaponics systems, tilapia seems to be the most popular fish. And a lot of folks are asking me, well, how's the best way to dress these fish? So this is why we're here today.
Yeah, Greg, and most of the tilapia are grown in tropical and subtropical regions of the world, principally Asia, South America, and Central America. They have a giant advantage there because of temperature, but because of the way we grow these fish in aquaponics, we may have an advantage too, but it does take a special way to fillet the fish to get the most meat per pound of body weight. We call it yield or dress out. We want to do the best job we can to get the most meat, because that's the only way you're going to be competitive, is to make sure that you grow them as cheaply as possible and that you fillet them to get the most meat.
John, that's so true. You and I were in Brazil last year, and we went to a medium-sized processing plant, and we actually witnessed a 40% yield on their tilapia. So we hope we can duplicate that here today for you all.
Every time I get a chance to travel around the world, I find it very educational, and I go a lot to Brazil. In fact, I was there a few weeks ago at that same processing plant. And what I found is that they are using the throats of the tilapia. We'll explain that later, what a throat is. And that increases the yield to almost 40%. I also understand that tilapia in the 1 to 1.5 pound range yield about 30 to 35% in meat. But as they get bigger, I've heard this, and I haven't proven it yet, and that's what we're challenging ourselves to do today, that as they get larger, the dress out or yield increases, and that would be a reason where we might have to grow our fish larger to be able to compete with the fish that come from overseas. But we're going to be challenging ourselves to get that yield today, and Brazil gave us a good idea of the challenge that we had to have ahead of us.
Good, John. Another thing that makes a difference in yield is actually the species of tilapia that you use, or the breed of tilapia that you use. I've heard from Charlie Schultz, who dressed a lot of fish at the University of Virgin Islands. He's now at the University of Kentucky. Charlie tells me that red tilapia tend to get bigger and tend to have higher yields than the standard green Nautica tilapia. So we're going to see, we've got both types here today. We're going to see if we get better yields off of the red tilapia.
As I said, I think we got a real challenge for ourselves trying to get 40% yield on a tilapia. But we're going to try that. We're going to weigh up some fish before we cut them, and then we're going to weigh the results to come up with those percentages. The most important thing to remember is that right out of the box, you're not going to be able to get good yields on tilapia until you practice. Anybody who does this has to practice, and that means basically hundreds of pounds of practice fish before you get to the point where you can get as much meat off that bone off that frame or bone as possible.
Well, John, what do you say we break out the equipment and try to get some decent fillet yields today?
I've already said that it takes a lot of practice to fillet a tilapia and get the good yields, but it also takes good equipment, and it's very important that we make sure that we use sanitary procedures and equipment that allows us to be sanitary, so that we do the best job of delivering to the customer what they need. First thing that I use is a heavy plastic board. This is about a 1/2 inch thick. Heavy plastic. It's called a Sandiplast board. That's probably a commercial name, but I've used it for many, many years. It's durable and it's good to cut on. You don't have to have expensive knives. This knife here you can buy at a discount store. Probably costs today about $8 or $10. It works. It doesn't hold the edge very well, but it works. One of the features of a good fillet knife is that it's flexible. You can see how I bend that knife. This is important that it's flexible so that the meat comes off the skin as you remove the skin from the slab of the fish that you've taken off one side of the fish. This is another knife that is a very nice Norwegian knife, I think, and its flexibility lies even in the handle. The handle even flexes so that you can get that meat removed from the skin. it costs in the range of $15 to $20. This knife is not a good fillet knife, but it is a knife. It's stiff, it's a butcher knife, but this is what I'm going to use to scale the skin around the throat. It's a nice stiff knife. There are fish scalers you can use and all kinds of ways to scale a fish. I just used a little stiff knife like that. These are knives. Since I work in Brazil a lot, these are poultry knives from Brazil, and they're fillet knives. They're not as flexible, but over the years I've started to use these knives more than I have the more flexible knives. This one here is long. It's probably not necessary, maybe on the larger tilapia. This is a fillet knife that has the same flexibility, and what I do, instead of bending the knife to make sure that we get all that meat removed from the skin, is I use a little bit of its bendability, but I take my hand on this side of the board and have room for my knuckles, and that way we can draw the knife along the skin and remove the meat from the skin. And so it's a matter of where you place your knuckles. The reason that we have these nice flexible knives is so that if you're over the board, your knuckles don't hit the board. And in this case, I've learned over the years just to put my knuckles on this side of the board. This is just another one of the knives, and this will probably be the knife that I use throughout this session today. This is a sharpening tool. It's important to have sharp knives, and cutting fish will make your knives dull because you're going through bone and going through scale, and they do dull up pretty quickly. Keep this around to keep an edge on it. I'm not very good at producing really sharp knives, but I also find it's not real important to be extremely sharp, just sharp. This right here is a tool that's used for skinning catfish. Sometimes I find it handy to pull a fin or pull something off of a fish, trim it up, and I keep it around. May not be using it, but it's a little fish skinning pliers that's used for skinning catfish. And we're going to move on to the fish now.
Okay, folks, to properly euthanize a tilapia, probably the best way to do this is to put it in an ice bath. As you know, tilapia don't like cold water very well. They actually succumb below 50 degrees. And if you put them in an ice bath at about 35 degrees, 34 degrees, it kills them pretty quickly. And I recommend that you put them in this ice bath for about 15 minutes minimum, okay? You want to have enough water in the ice bath so the water contacts the fish. You don't want to just use straight ice. You got to have an ice bath. All right, so this is a live red tilapia, and we're going to put them in this ice bath and make sure he's submerged in that ice water. And the reason we want to do that is for two reasons. It's humanely good for the fish. And also, tilapia have very sharp spines in the dorsal area, and these spines can hurt you. So you don't want to try to dress out a tilapia that's flopping around. You may get hurt. Okay, folks, well, we put our tilapia in the ice bath for required minutes, 15 minutes, and they are dead. And now we're going to fillet them. But before we get to that point, let me explain the sizes here. We have some fish here that are as small as 1.46 pounds all the way up to 3.24 pounds. And as you can see, we have some standard Niloticas, the green fish. And then we have some, actually they're subspecies of Nilotica, but they're red. They've been bred to be red. And we're going to fillet these out now and see what kind of yields we get with the different sizes and the different breeds. Okay, I'll turn it over to John.
Here we are. We're going to start filleting these tilapia now. The first one that I picked is the smallest one, 1.46 pounds, I believe. And we're going to see what kind of a yield we would get on the meat. There's several things you got to know about a tilapia. This is called the pectoral fin. This is called the pelvic fin. We're going to make a cut behind these fins here, and the normal thing to do is cut it across here, up to here, and then take the fillet back over the ribs. Something unique about a tilapia is that along the ribs there are pin bones on the inside, and eventually we'll get that fillet clean and have to cut those pin bones out with a little bit of meat. This is the dorsal fin, and there are bones that go into towards the backbone right here, and we cut along those bones of the dorsal fin so that we get as much meat off those bones as possible. So the first thing I really wanted to do is I'm going to do something that I've never done before, and that's that I'm going to see if we can save the throat. The throat comes from the pelvic fins here to the pectorals, and we're going to cut it out of the fish. But to be able to deal with it, we've got to do a little bit of a scaling job on the fish. So we're going to take the scales off, because once you take this throat off, it's almost impossible to scale once you remove it from the fish's head. So we'll take those scales off and see how well we do on this. Again, I'm using a stiff knife with very stiff scales at this point. Okay. So now I'm going to make this cut. I'm going to go to the other side. And this is called the forehead of the fish. And if you make the cut way up at the top like this, you can find there's a lot of scales here, but you find a kind of a bony structure that'll allow you to come right down here behind that pectoral fin, down to the pelvic fin. Now we've made the cut right through here, right through here. Normally on a fish of this size, I take the head off because it makes it so much easier to deal with. That could be done with a bandsaw if you're using if you have a processing plant. You could use a bandsaw and cut it off. Well, I make the same cut over here, making sure to get some of that shoulder meat, or forehead meat, excuse me, and cut behind the pectoral fin, right here, and then cut behind the pelvic fin, right here. And what we've done, we've made a circle all the way around the bones. And all the meat has been cut through on both sides. Easiest thing about a fish to take the head off is just twist it, and it breaks it away from the bone. Now we've got ourselves a headless fish, which is relatively easy to deal with when you're filleting it. As Greg said, these fins right here are sharp. Every one of the ends of those fins is sharp, so you've got to keep your hands away from them because they can puncture you. So what I do is, if you look right here real closely, you'll see the backbone right here. This is the backbone. And these fins, these bones that come from the dorsal fin, are right in here. So we're going to run the knife along the whole top of the fish up to the backbone and over these ribs. You can see the rib exposed right here. First thing to do is bring it back here so your knuckles have room to work. Be careful that the knife doesn't slip on the scales, because these scales get slippery until you cut through them. And cut right along that, right along those bones. And I did a fairly good job in my opinion, but we'll see after we weigh it. But right here are those bones that come in from the dorsal fin, and you can hear them right here. There's no meat attached to it. We got it pretty clean. This is the backbone right here. So we're up to the backbone. What we do now is we have to lift the knife up a little bit to go across the ribs. And we're going to expose the ribs, try to get as much meat off of them as possible. Here's the first set of ribs right here. And once you get to the end of the ribs, then you're into the belly meat. And to open this up all the way, we cut along the belly. We don't have to gut the fish. We just cut along the belly. And this fin here, called the anal fin, has bones that go in this way towards the backbone. So once we get to this fin, we want to run the knife along those bones and get as much meat as possible. Go back to the ribs. There I left a little meat behind. Go back to the ribs, and now you see what we've exposed here. Bones. There's a little bit of meat there. I did not as good a job as I would want to. Then the thing to do is get your hand cleared and feel the backbone. You can feel the vertebrae, and you keep your knife kind of flat, but digging in towards those vertebrae just a little bit. And what I do is I leave the fillet attached, and then I turn the fillet around, make a little cut here, and this is important to get good yield. Leave it attached, but don't leave any meat behind. And now we're going to take the knife, very carefully, put pressure on it so that we squeeze the meat away from the skin. There we go. Got a little rough spot there. Got one bone in there. These are fairly thin fish, so we don't have a lot of meat to get there, and we didn't leave any behind. But that's the fillet that we need. However, right here, in this spot right here, there are pin bones. And what we're going to do is take a little knife, cut through here on one side of those pin bones, and then the other side of the pin bones, and remove them like this. Because those bones, even if you fry the fish, are still visible and can catch in a person's mouth or throat. So when you see fillets in the grocery store, this is kind of what you see here, is this gap right here. That's because they cut the pin bones out. I've left one bone behind here in the belly. I'm going to remove it, and that's a trim. A little sloppy, wasn't perfect on it. I made a little mistake there, but it's acceptable to me. There's the frame with the skin, and if you look at it, there's a little piece of meat right there, but it's not too bad. I think this will get 32 to 33%. And right here, there's a little bit of meat right here at the very end of the ribs. It's very important to take the knife, when you hit the last rib, go right directly to the vertebrae and start cutting along it, and I missed a tiny piece. Now you go to the other side and do exactly the same thing. Follow those dorsal fin bones to the backbone, all the way down, so when you get to the backbone, you can actually hear the backbone. Lift it up, the fillet, as it's cut. There's no more cutting to go along these bones because we have reached the vertebrae. Now we're going to go over the top. For a right-handed person, the left side of the fish is a little harder, at least I think so. And so you have to cut those pin bones and then follow that with the tip of the knife, kind of follow those ribs down, and make sure you get all the meat you can off of those ribs, because the ribs are a little hard to deal with sometimes. And like I say, this fish is a little bit thin. There's the end of the ribs. That's the other side. Now what we do is put that knife down here and get it down to the backbone and start following it along. Remember, we got to go across that anal fin there too, the bones from the anal fin. But it's feeling pretty good. Take it down to the other side like this. Slide that knife, squeeze it against the skin so that you remove that flesh, the meat from the skin. About the same look, a little thin spot on the belly. I left a little piece of bone behind here. It's always good to trim it up so you don't sell your product or eat your product that has bones in it. I'm going to remove the pin bones that are right here. Make sure we can see that on the camera. That's the little piece of pin bone. So what we got here are the two fillets. Two fillets that are what they call wet filleted. This is what's left behind. You can see through the fish, the frame, and the skin is pretty clean. A little bit of meat left behind on the first one I did. But That's what it's supposed to look like when it's done. Now, Greg's going to weigh these up, and we'll report back to you in a minute as we do the next fish. Okay, we've run through all the fish that were up here, and we're on the last fish. I'm going to process this on camera so that you have a reminder of how to do it. We did what I think was a good job, even though it's me, the processor, saying that. We all agree that the fish, we got all the flesh we could off the fish. There wasn't any more to get. The yields or the dress out is not very good. That may be due to genetics, but more likely it's due to the fact that these fish were held off feed for a week before they came to the processing plant here. So for whatever reason, we're getting poor yields. We have nothing to say about if it's a big fish or a little fish, but we're all about showing you how to process a fish, and practice makes perfect. So we're going to take this 3.24 pound red tilapia, and we're going to process it. To me, it looks like one of the better quality fish. We're having trouble getting meat off the belly. The belly meat is very thin, and we're not able to really capture any meat there, even though we're right on top of the ribs. So if you remember, we're going to scale the we are getting some results by the throats. We're scaling the throat like this, and I've learned a little bit about it since I started this, how to do it faster, not the scaling, but the processing of the throat. It does add value to the fish. I would think that even it doesn't add a lot of work, but it adds some potential income to it. So we got the fish, the throat is scaled. Remember that there's meat way on up here. We want to capture that meat, come around like this by the pectoral fin and the pelvic fins, pectoral fins, pelvic fins. So we get up here around the forehead, so to speak, and come around, catch as much of that as possible, make a cut. We're cutting it right through behind the pelvic fin. And we cut right through the fish. Flip it over the other side, do the same thing over here. Cut behind that pectoral fin. And make a cut towards the top of the head here to get some of that forehead meat. These fish being as big as they are, they're a little harder to break the backbone and separate the head from the body, but I think we're still able to do that. Fish has a good place to grip it through the mouth. And we twisted it, and we're able to separate it. Set that aside. We'll get the what do you call it later? The throat. Clean this up a little bit so it's not so slippery. This is a male. By the way, we did have a couple females in the other fish that we processed, and their yield was, one of them was worse because it was full of eggs. Again, we make the cut up here at the top, at the head of the fish. These are the dorsal fins with the bones going towards the backbone. This is the backbone right here, and we're going to cut down to that backbone and the ribs that come from that backbone. Remember, we made some noise on it, noise of the bones that go from the dorsal fin towards the backbone. And this is the backbone. Now these are the ribs right here. The ribs are right in this area, and we're going to go over the top of the ribs with the fillet knife, cutting through those pin bones. Cutting along the belly here so that we capture as much of that as possible. Get to the anal fin and come along those bones. And you can see how thin these fish are around the ribs. Get down to the backbone, slide the knife flat along the backbone, let it trip up along the vertebrae every once in a while, make sure you're on that backbone. And there it is right there, the fillet attached to the fish. Put that fillet knife, get your knuckles situated on the back of the board here, behind the board, slide the big fillet knife here with a lot of pressure so you squeeze the meat away from the skin. Remember, the scales are still on this fish, so you don't have to scale the fish itself. You can see how thin the belly meat is right here, very thin, because the fish is not in good condition. That means less meat per pound of body weight. Take that knife, cut in front of the little pin bones and then in back of the little pin bones, and cut that piece of flesh out. Hate to lose the meat off of it, but those pin bones can be a problem for consumers. So then we show you a little miscut there, and there's what it looks like. It's one fillet. Go to the other side. Do the same thing. Cut along those dorsal fin bones down to the vertebrae, backbone. This is again where the right-handed person on the left side makes it hard. To go over, you got to cut those pin bones. You can hear them in there crunching. And then slide the knife. Oops, I actually cut some of those ribs off. Got a sharp knife here. I cut the ribs off, which I didn't mean to do. Lots of practice it takes. Lots of practice. I've never processed a tilapia this large before. Means it's a little more difficult to handle. Once you get good at it, though, you can go fast. I've seen people process these things very, very fast. The belly meat is so thin here that we're losing the skin off of it. It's just skin against the ribs. Get down against that backbone again. Slide the knife along, capture as much meat of that as possible. This is not as good a fish as I thought it was. Lots of thin belly meat against the ribs. But that's the way, as Greg says, that's fish farming for you. But I think most people would have their fish in a little better shape than this. Cut the pin bones out again. Pin bone side. Here's the two fillets. Take them over to be weighed, and we can show you the fish. It's see-through fish. Not much meat left on that thing. I've learned since I've been cutting these fish today. Like I say, I've never done the throats before, but I took my skinning pliers. I just grabbed the fin and put some pressure on it, pulled it off. Worked very nice. The skinning pliers are handy for a lot of things, especially this kind of pulling on fins and pieces of skin. Now, I've learned also that you can take the skinning pliers and just snap that bone right here pretty easily. Snap the other side. I could snap it. It's not snapping like I wanted it to, so I'm going to cut it without cutting my hand. Not too sure it's worth it to do this. Too much work involved on this piece. There. separated it from the bones. Then we cut what they call the isthmus right here, and the throat of the fish separated from the gills. Because really, this throat is where the gills are lined up. Oh, this is a very difficult one. Still haven't cut that bone, I guess. There's the throat cut down the middle, broken bone. And that's all we have. If you have any questions, contact your extension fishery specialist at Auburn, aquaculture specialist. We'd be glad to help. We have a department that has a lot of expertise in growing fish, processing fish, selling fish, and you can get them at the telephone number on your screen or the website. And please look us up if you ever need any help. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, Dr. Jensen has done a really good job of filleting our tilapia. Our results were not what we expected. The reasons for this, and John kind of pointed this out, is these fish had been held off feed for about 7 days before they were processed. Fish will lose quite a bit of weight in that amount of time. They may have lost anywhere from 7 to 10% weight in that period of time. We had to move the fish several times, and whenever you move fish, you don't want to have feed in their guts because it just adds stress. So that's one reason why the fish were a little bit underweight. Also, we did have a female in there, and the female had eggs in them, and so females will have a little bit worse dress out weight than males. So with that, we'll summarize the results here. Looking at the results, we started with fish that weighed between 1.46 pounds and 3.24 pounds. And because the fish were underweight, it's really hard to see trends in increasing weights and increasing dress outs. But generally speaking, our dress outs were anywhere between 26% and about 30%. We were expecting about 40, okay? So also when we added the throats, John was cutting the throats out, and keep in mind the throats do have some bone in them. They're not meatless. They do have some bone in them, but the throats were adding some significant weight to the final dress out. So if you can develop a market for your throats, you can add some significant weight to your yields here. Hey, we hope you found this video informative, and the main purpose of the video was to show you how to dress out tilapia. And if you have any further questions about this process, feel free to contact your extension aquaculturist here in Alabama, or you can use the contact information following this video. Thank you and have a great day.